זה בשביל הזום, בעצם. הסתדרנו. זה עובד?
זה עובד? אתה שומע אותי?
אני שומע אותך ככה. זה לדעתי מתחבר ישר
מיותר, באמא שלי זה מיותר.
תראה, אתה קיבלת עוד יפה,
נו, ברור שאני יותר מבוגר.
אני נראה, אתה יודע, כאילו אני בנגמש פה.
היית פעם בנגמש? אף פעם לא היית בנגמש.
לא, בלטרון הייתי בנגמש.
בלטרון, כן.
לא נחשב?
לא.
אתה היית בנגמש?
לא, הייתי במסוק.
מה, עם ביבי?
במונית המשפחתית.
קוראים לזה חשבון המדינה, אתה מכיר?
הוא בדרך לפה עכשיו.
כן. הוא בדיוק בא, הוא אמר שהוא יבוא לפה היום. הוא אמר שהוא רוצה לשמוע את ההרצאה שלך.
אותי אומר לו בפנים בדיוק מה אני חושב עליו.
אתה, אני לא הייתי מופתע.
מה?
אתה, אני לא מופתע.
הרי הנזק שהוא גורם זה...
כן. דרך אגב, אנחנו רוצים להיכנס ל-G-word?
לא?
ג'נוסייד.
לא.
לא?
לא.
צריך להסביר שזה לא זה, אבל אני אומר... צריך את זה הרצאה בשביל עצמה.
זה הרצאה מספר, לא יודע מה בימים האחרונים.
כן?
גם מחר אני מדבר בחטיבה.
וואלה. איפה? באיסט?
ווסט.
בווסט היי. על השואה או על...
על ההוריי.
אוקיי.
זה נורא חשוב.
כן, זה מאוד חשוב. אתה יודע איך אבן סיים את הספר? There will not be a fourth Reich. זה, איך הוא מסכם
את האירוע?
כן. אני לא... איך הוא יכול להבטיח את זה, אני לא יודע מה להגיד.
הייתי נורא נזהר עם ביטויים כאלו.
אני גם, בגלל זה הפתיע אותי מאוד.
לא יודע. אם הוא היה שואל אותי, הייתי אומר לו...
אני אשאל אותך היום, זה חלק מהלוז. טוב, איפה גלית? צריכה להגיד לנו שואו טיים.
זה מהמסכה?
כן?
זה פרופסור מקולומביה.
וואלה. מה, הוא מקומי פה או שהוא?
הוא בשבתון פה והוא מה שרוצה לשמוע אותנו. אותך.
אותי? תראה, אתה סעל ואני אפילו לא... כמה?
קדם טוראי.
אני שינשיני. מוכנים? Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Of course, thank you for calling me for hosting us, and especially thank you for Galit to organizing the... And now, with no further introduction, my good friend Amos, Giora. Oh, it's not connected? Okay.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear it? Huh? Oh, I see. Okay. So
We'll speak loudly.
So we'll speak. Yes. Okay. Okay. Now, Amos Giora.
So good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us on Super Bowl Sunday. and we promised to finish by 4:30.
We'll do our best.
We'll do our best. When we started talking about this, gathering, we realized that there were issues relevant, for better or for worse, both historically and in contemporary society. And those of you who know me know that I'm not one to duck behind issues, and I think it's important to address issues directly and concisely. We don't have to agree about anything, and fair to assume that we will disagree about much, but I do think that it's important to have these discussions. And before we dive in, as many of you know, it's important to the conversation from my perspective. I speak as the only child of 2 Holocaust survivors, and for me, the older I get, I'm 68 and a half. There's no doubt that addressing the Holocaust becomes more and more important for me, not only obviously historically, but asking myself how it fits into where we are today. I do so with significant discomfort because were my parents here, they're both deceased, were my parents here, they would be, I think they would shudder, not shudder with a double D, right, shudder, at the fact that I am using a word I hate, but using the Holocaust to draw contemporary analogies with all the discomfort of drawing contemporary analogies. That's point 1. Point 2, may I? I must make the following important point, and I turn to Amy here. Those of you who don't know, for the past how many ever years, Amy is a junior high school teacher at Eisenhower Junior High, and she has invited me to come speak to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders on the Holocaust. And with all due respect to all of you here who are in your 30s, there is nothing more important than speaking to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And tomorrow, thanks to Amy, I'm speaking at Kennedy Junior High, and then in March at Amy's school. And again, the older I get, that becomes even more important because it's important for me to bring my parents' god-awful story to contemporary society. And there's no audience that's more important than young people. And so the fact that Amy has opened up this whole new world for me, I am forever grateful to you. And if Mom and Dad at Giora were here, they would be uncomfortable as hell with that. But that's okay, with all due respect to Mom and Dad. So when I look back, on my parents' story, which I wrote about when I wrote my book, The Crime of Complicity, The Bystander, and the Holocaust, I need to make a step back, which will explain part of this entire discussion. I'm an only child, and when I was raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and when I was 12, my father, with whom I had a great, great, great relationship, took me canoeing. Who the hell knows why canoeing? Because my father would know a canoe from a football. But he took me canoeing, and in the middle of this canoe trip, he said to me, and I don't remember, I apologize, whether in Hebrew or in English, I don't remember. He said to me, in 1 minute, I will tell you my Holocaust story, and in 1 minute, I will tell you your mother's Holocaust story, and this is the first and last time we will ever have this conversation. We did have a dog, so I came home and I said to the dog something like, dude, what do we do with this, right? But my parents were serious. There was no book about the Holocaust in the house. The word Holocaust was never mentioned in our house. And when I was a junior in college, I went to Kenyon College in Gambier, Ohio. My mentor was Gentile, but his wife, Tamar, was like me, second generation, only child, and knew nothing. And Professor Evans said to me, at some point you need to come to grips with Jewishness, Judaism, and the Holocaust. I said, sure, that's a great idea. What do I do? And he said, you need to write an honors thesis on the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And it is beyond embarrassing, beyond embarrassing, beyond embarrassing. To my everlasting shame, I had no idea what the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was, to my shame. I came home and I said to my parents, Professor Evans wants me to write a thesis on the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. My mom looked at my dad and said, it's time for dinner. Boom, boom. And I did write the thesis. I have no idea if they ever read it, but I did write it. Fast forward, and I'll stop here in a second. Fast forward 25 years ago, I was still in the IDF, so it's 25 years ago, the Hungarian Catholic Church, under the auspices of the Vatican, did a mea culpa, because my parents, were both Holocaust survivors from Hungary. So this huge, huge conference on the Catholic Church's role in the Holocaust. And they looked for a keynote speaker, and it had to meet 3 criteria. It had to be a world-class academic, someone who spoke Hungarian, and it had to be a Holocaust survivor from Hungary. And long story short, my father was the keynote speaker. So when they reached out to my dad and invited him to be the keynote speaker, my father said, you know, there are 2 conditions to his coming. 1, he will not speak Hungarian, and 2, he will speak the truth. They said, on Hungarian, we're fine. On the truth, we need to talk about that. And he said, well, actually, we don't need to talk about it, because if there's no truth, I'm not coming. And they must have reached some kind of a whatever, because my dad went. I never knew about this, because, you know, not in front of the children. Roll my eyes. The following year, he was invited again, and my mom said to me, have him take you. And so I went with my dad, and there was a second talk, which was in Hungarian. And the only words I understood were CNN, because that doesn't work in Hungarian. But other than that, I had no idea what the hell he talked about. And then we spent, and a great, again, emphasize, a great relationship with my dad. We spent 3 days on what we call a Holocaust roots trip, which were the 3 most miserable days of my life. I could not film him, I could not take pictures of him, and I couldn't ask questions. Okay. Great, okay. We were in Budapest, and he says, well, we have to go to the spot from which he was deported, because he was deported to a camp in Yugoslavia. We went to there. I didn't even think to ask him, how did you get to Bor? It was called Bor, the camp. How did you get from Budapest to Bor? Never occurred to me to ask, and it's a wasted opportunity every which way on Sunday. It was either by train or bus or combination or walking. I don't know. Okay. Then he said to me, we need to go to my hometown, which is in eastern Hungary, god-awful place. And I said, well, we'll rent a car. And he says, no, we're going by train. I said, Dad, there's no way I'm going east on a train with a Holocaust survivor. These eastbound trains didn't work really well for us back in those days. And he said, no, we're actually going to go by car, by train. Okay, so we reached a compromise. We went first class. So those of you who've been to Hungary know the first class trains in Hungary. No, they're not first class, but we went. Okay. We get to the train station in the town, which I can't pronounce, and here's why we went by train. We get off the train. We stand on the train platform, and he says, from here, on this train platform, they pushed them, his parents, onto the train on May 26, 1944. And that's why we went by train, because he hadn't been on that platform, you know, because he had been sent to school in Budapest. He had not been there in a bazillion years. One more story, and then I promise, it's all related. As some of you know, 14 months ago, I was home in Iz, and I got an email, and the subject line was my late grandfather's name. My grandparents were murdered in Auschwitz. So the subject line, it's 11 o'clock in the evening, is my grandfather's name who was murdered in Auschwitz. So my first thought was, this is obviously spam, right? And then I said, okay, you know what? I'll start reading it. And the first line was, if you are the son of Professor Giora, because my father was also, and the grandson of Shlomo Natan Goldberg, please keep reading this email. So I kept reading the email. I was convinced it was spam. Like a very long story short, it was to let me know my grandfather, when he had been deported from that train station, my grandparents lived in poverty. What did my grandfather take with him to Auschwitz? Books. I today have those 4 books. It is an absolutely incredible story. The books he took with him, and I don't know what my grandmother took. When they got to the selection line, you left, you know, what you schlepped, you left here. The books made their way from Auschwitz to Streicher. If you don't know who Streicher was, Streicher was the chief ideologue of the Nazi Party, the editor of the paper Der Stürmer. The books were sent to Streicher's house. There are somewhere between 10 to 20,000 books there. There's an extraordinary organization paid for by the German government that tries to find second generation, third generation. I mean, it's an incredible story. And we today have the 4 books. I have 2, and I gave 2 to my cousin's daughter, because we're the only survivors. In parentheses, I'm hoping to write a book about this, because it ties everything together. If I haven't put you to sleep yet, back to you.
Thank you. Question that might be trivial to everybody here, especially with Holocaust, International Holocaust Memorial Day being.
You're going to have to speak at the Sechlet Biblical.
I'll do my best. So a natural question, probably very trivial to everybody here, especially having International Holocaust Memorial Day 2 weeks ago. What do you think is the essential and important facts about considering the Holocaust today?
I look right at you, Amy, and here's the story, the real story today. It's Holocaust denial. And if you're not aware of it, Holocaust denial is here, there, and everywhere. Because we have to be polite here, yes? It's a disease. I don't know any other way to describe it. But if you're not aware of Holocaust denial, it is a real thing. And not only is there Holocaust denial, the more polite version is called Holocaust minimizing. And I will give you an example. X years ago, I was invited, right before I taught here, I taught at Case Western in Cleveland, and I was invited to Columbus, Ohio. Those of you who don't know, the whole Michigan-Ohio State thing, fine. Okay, so I agreed to go. I mean, it's such a hellhole. And and I was invited to debate a very well-known professor of international law on the legality of the security barrier fence between Israel and the West Bank. I said, fine. As I'm driving there, my research assistant, Rachel Cohen, calls me and says to me, Giora, do you know the guy who you're debating is a Holocaust minimizer? I had never heard the term before. Okay, so he has written, that he does acknowledge that the Holocaust happened. Well, but it wasn't 6 million, it was 2 million. Okay. So I get to this horrible place, Columbus, and we debate the fence. I mean, and there are a gazillion people there. At the end of this, it was a debate, the way the debate should be. Okay. At the end of the debate, he comes up to me and extends his hand to me to shake my hand. Job well done. I did something I've never done before in my life. I refused to shake his hand. And I had my mom and dad right smack in front of me. There's no way I would shake his hand. Could not. He sees, wait, hang on. The next day I get an email this long from the provost of Ohio State, who's Jewish, who writes to me, Dear Professor Giora, maybe without the dear, right? Professor Giora, you violated every tenet of decency in the academy. You embarrassed us. You embarrassed yourself. You're a disgrace. How did you conduct yourself like this? I then called my dean. I said, Dean, what do I do with this? And my dean said, you have 3 options. Option number 1 is a tit-for-tat response, talk. Option number 2 is to delete. And option number 3 is fill in the blank to do to yourself. Okay. I thought about it long and hard. And I said, well, what do you do with someone like this? And I decided to, delete. I, to this day, don't know if I did the right thing or not, because maybe I should have confronted him. And then I saw him a few years later. He came up to me, Amos, it's so good to see you. We had a great discussion in Columbus. How have you been? Boom. And I looked right at that hand, and I said, no way. Now, because I think we don't have to agree. I think to acknowledge people like that is simply wrong, because they don't deserve acknowledgement. In my opinion. To your question, there is nothing more important than confronting this. When the book, The Crime of Complicity, The Bystander of the Holocaust came out, 3 o'clock in the morning I woke up, yes, because I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I woke up to death threats that were posted on a website, the neo-Nazi website, their Stumer, which is whatever it's called in Idaho, yes, was posting how to kill me, where to kill me. Okay. That was at 3 in the morning. At 8 in the morning, they were posting my home address, which is, that's, for me, that's one step too far. And then a couple days later, I was at the Salt Lake airport in the lounge, and I was on the front page of the Trib. There's a big article about me. Yay. And I'm on the phone with a friend of mine, and the woman sitting next to me looks over, and she sees me. She sees the article. She said, "Oh, that's really cool. That's you." I said, "That's me." And she sees what is being written about me, right? Because the book about the Holocaust. And she says to me, "Do you know who Richard Spencer is?" I said, "Of course I know who Richard Spencer is, because he's a total awful human being it's his website that posted the death threats, right? He's neo-Nazi." And she says to me, "Well, my husband and I are best friends with his parents." I thought, okay. And then she says to me the following, "You know what I'm really sorry about?" And I said, "No, ma'am, what are you really sorry about?" She says to me, "I'm really sorry I left my gun at home." I had 3 options. One, to just say to her, ma'am, this conversation is over. Two, to go to the airport police. And three, I'm just not fast enough to take my iPhone and say, what did you say? So I got up and left. I know, I'm open. I have friends who told me I did the wrong thing, that I should have gone to the police. I don't know. The only reason I share that, if you, to your question, Tom, this stuff is alive and well. And after the book came out, I know I'm well aware of this, because I talk about the Holocaust in contemporary, also applying it to contemporary society, sexual assaults. There was great criticism of me in the American Jewish community. I'm well aware that for quote unquote using the Holocaust to tell a contemporary story, I read the criticism of me. And I went to my mom and I said, if you are offended that I'm using your story to try to address the enablers and bystanders in sexual assaults today, the last thing you want to do is offend your mother, right? And I said, I will stop immediately. And Mom Giora, who was 5'2", 97 pounds, said to me, that's the way Mom spoke. She said to me, fill in the blank, tell them to go themselves, and because that's the way Mom spoke. And I continued, but I know there are people who are very uncomfortable about using the Holocaust to tell a contemporary story. If Mom were here, she would tell you all, deal with it.
Okay, so let's get into the depth of it. So you said bystanders and enablers, and these are two terms that are very associated with a lot of your work. So maybe let's start with definitions and some examples, maybe in the context of the Holocaust and leading them to today.
Sure. So the bystander is the person who's present when something happens. So when my dad, when I wrote the book, I found my parents' house, because I don't know how many of you have ever been to Hungary. It's the third rule. If you have enough money, you pay people, you can bribe people, right? So we found the house, because we work your way backwards, Ministry of Interior in Hungary. Okay. And then I said to the genealogist, I said, now what I want to do is make the walk from the house to the train station. And that was the plan, and I said, he was a great guy, the genealogist. Weakness on my part, I didn't have the wherewithal to actually do the walk. So we drove, we did it. And then we got to the Jewish cemetery in Budapest. There's a huge, memorial wall. My father's hometown, there were 10,000 Jews who were sent to Auschwitz. 6 came back. He, the genealogist, had done an incredible thing for which I'm forever grateful. He had found the daughter of the woman who was my parents' neighbor. No, the daughter of the woman who was my grandparents' neighbors, yes. Her mom is one of the 6 who came back. So I met her daughter. And what I wanted to know was one thing, bystanders. How did the Gentiles in this town deal with the Jews as they were being marched to the train station? And they were spat at, berated, up. So that for me is a bystander. The enabler is the person who knows of harm and makes the conscious decision to protect the institution, to protect the perpetrator, thereby exacerbating the harm of the vulnerable individual. The book, the Bystander in the Holocaust, is about those who saw, in parentheses, when my mom is Anne Frank. My mother was in the attic with my grandmother. Right. They were twice taken to be shot. The first time they were saved is an incredible story by Jewish youth who had stolen uniforms of the collaborators and would they would run through the streets of Budapest at night saying, leave those Jews to us. It was a ruse, and that's how my mother was saved the first time. The second time, we're all adults here, count to 3, yes, we're all adults here. I'm absolutely convinced that to save my mother, who was 12, that my grandmother provided sexual services to the Nazis, and that's perfectly fine. Anybody here who's a parent will do the exact same thing to save their child. If you say no, you're full of shit. And I'm serious. I know people are upset by the sexual services stuff, but it is what it is as a parent. So when my mother was running through the streets of Budapest, bystanders are those who saw them. Okay. The enablers, in many ways, are more, I don't know, in English, heinous, because you know that harm is, right? And I think some of you know that I write about enablers in sexual assaults. I've written about Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State, Catholic Church, and I don't care about the perpetrator. I mean, the perpetrator is boring as hell. It's the enabler. who knows about the harm, the trainer, coach, doctor, university president, go on and on. For me, it's all about the enabler, which is why, as Yotam knows, I'm very active and involved in seeking to criminalize the enabler. I've also been very involved in legislation to criminalize the bystander. And thanks to former Representative Brian King, who Andy works for, we passed, Representative King and Senator Bramble passed legislation in Utah criminalizing the bystander. There are, I think, 30 other states that criminalize the bystander. The criminalizing of the enabler, I've testified in Australia, Holland, met with Israeli member of Knesset. We passed a bill, the bill was passed in Holland, but the way it works in Holland, they pass a bill and then they actually write the bill. So it passed and the government fell. Okay, but at least we made some progress. It's challenging as hell for legislators to criminalize those who are not present when the harm occurs. Those of you who are lawyers, it's not quite conspiracy. He's not part of the conspiracy. He's not he's not an accomplice. He's not aiding and abetting. It's one step beneath. But I am absolutely fully locked in on this. And some of you know that at the law school, we've created the Bystander Initiative, this extraordinary donor-based undertaking with, by now has had over 20 students working with me, book, article, lectures, because this is me straight based from the Holocaust. With all due respect, Himmler, Heydrich, and all the rest of them, without the bystander and without the enabler, 6 million Jews aren't murdered.
So why are there bystanders?
So I assume some of you know about Kitty Genovese. That's the woman who was murdered in the Queens in 1963. So what the New York Times wrote the next day, that there were 52 or 40, it was not true. The reporter, God love the New York Times, all the news that fits to print, I know, but he made it up, but that's okay. There were a limited number of bystanders, one in particular who's important, who heard her screaming. Because Mosby, the killer, stabs her and she runs and runs and runs, and then he follows her and he stabs her again. Okay. The bystander who heard her screaming, actually we now know knew her. But remember, in New York in 1963, there's no 911. To call the police, you have to know your precinct's phone number. Some of you don't even know you have a precinct, right? And so what he did is he called his sister and said, what's the precinct's phone number? I mean, they got it. By the time the police showed up, the cop comes, and Kitty Genovese dies in the policeman's arms. There was no reason for her to die whatsoever. And then the bystander thing really took off because of the article by the two psychologists, and it became important to address those who are there and ignore harm. And I'm willing to bet, never bet your last dollar, because you got to feed your children and grandchildren, that most, if not all of you, have also been bystanders one time or another in your life. I can testify as to myself. I was once a bystander. Yay for me, I saved someone's life. Yay for me. And I've also been a bystander twice, where I was at a Michigan football game, and there was an incident, and I was with my friend, and we got to go to the game, and we left the situation, and I would criminalize me. And the second time I was home in and there was we had neighbors who were, and they, the father, who I really didn't like, put his kid out at night. And the kid was screaming and screaming, and we didn't call the police, and I have no rational explanation other than we didn't. So I would criminalize me. I would punish me without any hesitation. And yay for me for once saving someone's life. The enablers are in many ways, I need to say, when we started with Representative King, there were 5 reasons to vote. It took us 3 or 4 legislative sessions before we finally passed the bill. There were 5 reasons to vote against the bill. Reason number 1 was because this will flood the 911 system. So we had done empirical work with my then research assistant. I don't know if you guys knew Jessie Dyer. She graduated before you. Jessie done a huge empirical work to see what was happening in other states, and there was not one example of the 911, of this flooding the 911 system. We also brought in the chief firefighter of the great state of Utah, who said to the legislators, we need we need people to call. I mean, this is like ridiculous. Okay, but people voted against it because it'll flood the 911 system. The second reason was it will lead to an onslaught of civil suits. We did an empirical study of that every which way, just absolutely not true. But that's okay, you can still say it. 3 is the libertarian state argument, the nanny state, we have too much legislation, too much criminalization, okay? The 4th reason was, this will offend some, I know, We in Utah are good people, and we don't need the legislature to tell us what to do because the Lord guides us. Okay, fine. And the fifth reason is the only one that made any sense. And that is that this will be an opportunity for law enforcement to target minority communities. While writing the book, I'd given a talk in progress talk at the University of Virginia Law School. You know, there were 200 law students in front of me. It was a terrible moment. Stood up, they were all sitting. Stood up an African-American woman, student. And in front of her classmates, I can't imagine being her. In front of her classmates, she starts crying, which is terrible, right? She says to me, this is really interesting. What's the next word after interesting? But she said, when you, upper middle class white guy, dials 911, the immediate assumption is you're the victim. When we, African Americans, punch in 911, the immediate assumption is that we are the perpetrator. So Representative King and I, Representative King then met with the ACLU and Black Lives Matter. And we also brought in the chief prosecutor liaison to the legislature, Will Carlson, who addressed this issue, which needs to be out there, fear of abuse of prosecutorial discretion. It is an issue, but at the end of the day, the bill passed. Enabling is harder because the enabler, unlike the bystander, is not present. But you spend enough time, as I do, with sexual assault survivors. I've by now met with sexual assault survivors from over 30 countries. When you reverse engineer with them, never say all. Most of them say about the perpetrator, so the incident was awful, but that's not the issue. The issue is when they reverse engineer, they realize it never, ever should have happened because the perpetrator should have been in jail. And I'll give you 2 examples. Again, we're all adults here, trigger warnings apply. The first woman is Maddie Larson, who was an elite gymnast, not Olympics, one step beneath. When she was training for the Olympics, the team doctor was Larry Nassar, who's the one, right, okay. Larry Nassar sexually violated her 750 times. When you reverse engineer it, the way it happened is USA gymnastics officials would send her and the other girls, but alone, to Nassar's hotel room at night for medical treatment. If Maddie Larson were here, and she's beyond powerful, right? It's in my book, because it was Maddie's insistence, yes? We're all adults, promise me we're all adults. Maddie says, who the F sends a 13-year-old girl alone to a man's hotel room? What do you think is going to happen? Tiffany Thomas Lopez was sexually violated by Nassar 150 times. On a Thursday evening, she had enough. And she went to the team woman trainer and did to her what Nassar was doing to her. The team trainer says, oh gosh, this is really bad. Well, you got to go tell the head trainer. Sends a 17-year-old alone to the head trainer, also a woman, to tell her. The head trainer goes to the coach, and what do? They manipulate to have Tiffany removed from the team. That's what enablers do. And that's when I spend as much time as I do with sexual assault survivors, men and women alike, men and women alike, their anger, for many of them, never say all of them, is not the perpetrator is disgusting. It's the enabler. It's absolutely the enabler who they realize could have prevented it and made the conscious decision in the name of institutional complicity to protect the institution. Some of you know I wrote a book about a boy who was murdered by his teacher in West Virginia. He was a pedophile teacher who for 30 years had been a pedophile. Everybody knew, but every time teachers, parents, students complained to school districts, the boy's name was Jeremy Bell. And the private detective who broke the case, Mr. Barber, bequeathed to me 15,000 pages of documents. Andy we worked with Aya on it. We reversed engineered it, and we could show every step of the way, 30 years, where enablers protected the teacher because he was a great guy.
So you mentioned both BLM and you mentioned the right wing, the neo-Nazis. So do you think there is a political context within enablers and bystanders? Is there any political leaning, or is there an interpolitical context to it?
So as your Tom knows, I think some of you know, I just finished writing a new book that's coming out in May. I should know the title of my own book. Enablers normalizing the unimaginable. It's about the enablers in Israel. The enablers who protect Netanyahu in terms of the judicial reform and the hostages. So they're from the right. Can I foresee enablers on the left also? It wouldn't, shock me. We don't have to agree. I showed you the picture. When I was running this morning in Sugar House, there's a sign on a record store, ICE not welcome here without a warrant. And frankly, my friends, there are enablers here who are enabling ICE. And I will not tell you who, will not. You'll respect that, thank you. I met with someone who is a Republican insider, and I asked him about a particular US senator, and I said, are there pictures of him? And when you ask that pictures, that euphemism, are there pictures, it means obviously in sexual compromising positions, yes. And the insider says to me, I'm not going to say yes, and I'm not going to say no. And I said, well, you just said yes. Okay. So I said to myself about this particular US senator, okay, so there are pictures of you doing bad things. On the other hand, what's happening on a larger scale, with all due respect, is far more important than to your personal predilections. Those are enablers, but I can see enablers on the left also. This will irritate some, not irritate others. That's okay, right? After, we haven't talked about October 7th yet. After October 7th, as Yotam knows, I do public speaking all the time, right? I get obviously interviewed all the time. And I said this I said this last week at the New York City Bar Association, so I can quote myself. I said the biggest supporters of Hamas worldwide were American college students. Some of them couldn't find Gaza on the map. And when they're yelling the river to the sea, I assume you've seen the guy with the microphone going, or the guy from Anti-Semite side, asking what river, what sea, from the Caribbean to the Mississippi. They're clueless. They're not enablers, but they're not, I don't know what they are. But the enabling on the left, I don't know enough, because my book is about, right, and at my age, if you don't know, but as Tom knows, there's no bigger critic than me of Netanyahu. Trust me, that's what my book is about, right? Trust me. But there's a difference between criticizing Netanyahu, which is 100% legitimate, and the unhinged criticism of Israel. It's not the same thing. It's complicated as hell. The enablers protect in Israel. I should have said this at the beginning. Sorry. For me, all roads from October 7th until last week ran through the hostages. I've gone to hundreds of demonstrations over the last 5 years, like Yotam also. I've had my physical interaction with the police. I've had my verbal abuse with the Netanyahu supporters, but trust me, I give as good as I get. You should hear my wife. But you can't intimidate me, right? But the fact that it took 2 years to get the hostages home is because of the enablers. At the end of the day. How many, we've been to hundreds of demonstrations? Because that's what life became. And for me, I confess, I would go to the demonstrations, I would come home and I would write. So the book is personal because I'm writing about being at demonstrations. But for me, it's all about the need to criminalize the enablers without whom the hostages would have been home well before that. And as Yotam knows, we live in a small town outside Jerusalem, Mevaseret. One of the hostages, Bukhbut, is from our town. And then, many of you have been to Israel. Everybody knows everybody. There are no degrees of separation in Israel. Everybody knows a hostage or a hostage family. Somebody knows shouldn't have taken 2 years, and Netanyahu in that sense has blood in his hands. And some of you, I know everybody wants to ask about Gaza. For me, the last 2 years, I confess, has been like this, focused 100% on the judicial reform and the hostages. And if I had my way, there would be a crime in Israel called the abandonment of hostages, like there's an abandonment of children. And they knew that, I assume many of you have seen, if you haven't seen it, maybe through Galit, there's the YouTube interview that's been translated into Hebrew of Romi. Romi is the woman who was, have you seen it? She was held for a year and a half. She was raped every day for the first month. Her two-night interview back to back in Hebrew There are no words. It's been translated into English. It's a half hour on YouTube. There are no words. But if you want to understand the consequences of enabling, you have to watch Romy talk about what happened to her that first month, which is there are no words. And her mother, you should hear, her mom is her mom. Like most of you here have children. I mean, her mom confronts this directly about the fact that her daughter was raped for a month, and she knows exactly who should be blamed. Yes, Hamas should be blamed, and yes, the guys from Hamas who raped her, for this will piss some of you off, but it is what it is. I've been interviewed on this also. The guys from Hamas who raped her for a month, they don't need to be captured. It's fine to kill them. I know this will irritate some of you. That's okay. But that's all about enabling.
So, if you already start talking about October 7th, let's continue in that route. So, as you mentioned, there are all these, campus students who go and protest against Israel. And of course, you have people who are pro-Israel on the other hand. What about the people in the middle? Right? People who, go on with their lives, go to the supermarket. And do you think they're enablers? Do you think they have a part in this?
I will begin with the following. Israelis who didn't protest were not, I'm exaggerating by 5%. I would cut off a friendship with them. Not interested. Because if you know there are hostages and you're not protesting, what the hell are you doing with yourself? That's me. I need to add in parentheses, my wife does not allow anybody into her house who votes for Netanyahu. We even had an electrician who I liked until he told me he voted for Bibi, and I told my wife that that he votes for Bibi. She says find a new electrician. And so I'm still. If any of you want to be an electrician in Israel, we'd be happy to hire you. I get that it's not that people are apathetic. People have other things going on in their lives. But the student demonstrations, I don't know enough where it came from. I was stunned by how many were protesting and how this will be offensive, I know. The lack of knowledge. It just blew me away. And I saw all of you, I've seen the pictures of people tearing hostage posters down. I have no words for that, but hang on. There was a demonstration in Jerusalem, right? And I was waiting for the marchers to come up to join them, and there was an Orthodox guy there, my age, 100 type thing. And I said to him, "No, you're joining us?" And he said, "No." I said, "They're hostages. They're Jewish, they're Muslim, they're Israelis, they're hostages." And he said, "Not joining." And I just find that to be, because we're polite here, beyond unacceptable. He wasn't that, I didn't know if he was a BB guy, not a BB guy, but there are hostages. There are women being raped. We all knew this. I find that to be, we're in polite company, beyond extraordinary. And I know people who didn't protest, and they would say, "Oh, it doesn't." For the hostage families, the greatest thing, the fact that we were there every Saturday night, rain, like we did. I did the march from Tel Aviv, right? Together. It's those of you who've been to Israel in the summer, it sucks, right? It's hot, humid, it's gross, right? That's when I talked to Matan's mother, to Einav, right? People who don't participate in that, and for the hostage families, they said this every Saturday night, "Thank you for coming." And that, I think, meant more to them than the rest of us can understand, because I don't think you can understand that. So my anger is that Israelis who prefer to stay home and watch, whatever sporting event was on TV or whatever. People here, the student protesters, and I need to also add, if I may, those of you who don't know, there's a boycott of Israeli academics and of Israeli academia. If you didn't know, now you know. I was invited to a very prestigious, huge conference in November in Canada. Right. And we had a Zoom meeting before, and I said I will only come if there's security. And I was asked why. I said, because the last time I spoke in Canada, I had police protection and I was attacked. The car I was in was attacked. And so I said, I won't do, without police protection. They said, fine, okay. I got an email a couple nights before saying there had been a meeting, gosh, and it had been decided that it's okay to invite me to dinner. And I called my wife and I said, I'm going to tell them all to go F themselves. You have to have a meeting to decide to invite me to dinner? And my wife said, no, go. So I went. Okay, you know, wife tells you to go, you go, right? Life is pretty simple. So I went. And then there was a really interesting discussion at lunch in my presence. Who will sit next to me on the panel? I mean, I'm a relatively good guy, right? And not everybody wanted to sit next to me. We solved that, yes, okay. And then I was told later that there had been people who were going to join the panel but had begged off when they saw that I was on the panel. In spite of my politics are from the left and is, yes, and I'm not some warmongering is, but I'm an Israeli. And that academic boycott is heinous, and it's not going away. And there's real concern in Israel today that will be extended to an economic boycott in Israel, big businesses backing off. Where this all goes, I don't know.
So, if you talk about Israel, and so we, as you know, as everybody here knows, there's a lot of Jews within the Jewish communities in the U.S. who support these anti-Israel movements and protests and stuff like that. Do you think there is any connective line between what we talked about, the context of the Holocaust, and what's going on today, especially within these groups?
I just saw a survey. I think it was what's the JTA was a Jewish Telegraphic Agency, right? Is that right? Okay. That's something like, I think it was. I want to be careful. Over 50% of Jewish Americans don't identify as Zionists. So I don't know exactly what that means. I don't identify as Zionists. I don't know exactly what that means and how it plays itself out.
Did
There
they
is
mention
there,
definition?
huh?
Did they mention definition?
No, because I didn't
Zionist?
have I like to call. I didn't have the energy to read the article. I mean, there's only so much you can read, right? I think that the Israeli leadership, a pox on their house, is disdainful of the diaspora. The diaspora is good for one thing, and that's money. And I think if they had half a brain, which they don't have, they would understand that American Jews under 40, I think, are going to vote with their feet with respect to Israel. And that is going to bite us in the ass down the road. And I saw now there was a Democratic primary in New Jersey, I think. In New Jersey. And Israel becomes like the goddamn issue in the primary in New Jersey. I mean, I understand there are other issues in New Jersey. I know they're not playing in the Super Bowl today, no team from New Jersey. But there are other issues in New Jersey other than Israel. And I'm going to mispronounce it. The politicization of Israel in American politics in there's a midterm election 2026, midterm elections. I think that's a huge issue, and I know that the government of Israel, if you didn't see this 2 hours ago or 3 hours ago, in essence voted to begin the process of annexation of the West Bank, which is beyond vile, awful. Netanyahu is coming now to meet with Trump. I don't know how this will play itself out, but I really do think, and again, decision leaders in Israel are, in polite English, are disdainful. And you share the following. Was it a BDS, right?
Yeah.
X years ago, we'll call him Joe, obviously not Joe, cabinet member in the Israeli government. I said to him, what are you bastards going to do with BDS? He said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I said, good Lord. So I explained BDS, boycott, divestiture, sanction, to him. And then the government had a meeting on this, and they said, well, this is something we're going to have to address, which means we're not going to do anything with it. Like, thanks for sharing your concern. It's a real issue, which the government is utterly clueless to. And we do have a minister, Shikli minister of whatever it's called, yes. I'm sure there's a better word than disdainful, but we'll go with disdainful. I think they're utterly clueless as to the consequences of American Jews under 40, if not under 50, walking away from Israel. I think it will take 1 or 2 generations. We do have elections in October, like the midterm elections here in November. We have in October 2026. It's obvious that this government needs to come to a crashing end. We need to, this is me, we need to rebuild Israel. We need to rebuild our intra-society. I know everybody wants to talk about Gaza, West Bank, Iran. For people like me, those are not the issues. The issue, underline, the issue is the rebuilding of our society from within. Now that the hostages are home, amen, amen. And by the way, it is what it is. You can see in Israel signs thanking Donald Trump. If not for Donald Trump, the hostages are not home. The last thing in the world Netanyahu wanted was the hostages to come home because he was fearful of his right-wing fascist partners in the coalition government. But we need to rebuild our society. We need to do that from within.
So you think the politicization of Israel does affect the relationship within the Jewish community? And
I'm not an expert in the American Jewish community, but I know from friends that, if I'm using the wrong term, there can be like generational divide within a family, that the parents, my age type thing, who are, been with Israel for the last whatever, that their children and or grandchildren do not have the same affinity to that they did. How this will play itself out, who the hell knows? And I assume that it's because of, and if I'm wrong, I assume it's not because of the hostages, it's because of Gaza. I think most of you know that I served while serving in the IDF for 20. I also served as the legal advisor of the Gaza Strip. I think most of you know I've spent 15 years of my adult life negotiating implementation of the Oslo peace process, 5 years officially, 10 years back channel. I mean, one of the obvious questions is Gaza to where? Who's going to rebuild Gaza? And for all adults here, right? The truth of the matter is nobody gives a rat's ass about Gaza. That's the truth. The Arab world could care less. The Palestinians in the West Bank could care less. Ask yourself, how many pro-Hamas demonstrations were there in the West Bank? 0. Ask yourself, how many pro-Hamas demonstrations there were in the Arab world? 0. There were, of course, in Europe, and there were on American college campuses. So what's his name from Turkey? Erdogan has this fantasy about coming into Gaza. Great. Sisi of Egypt is scared shitless of Hamas because he knows that Hamas has a direct relation to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and he sees that them combining would, undermine him. The Jordanians couldn't find Gaza on a map if you paid them. The Lebanese have their own issue. The Syrians have their own issue. Qatar plays both sides of the street. They gave up hundreds of millions here, which for them is like a cup of coffee at Starbucks, and they gave hundreds of bazillion dollars here, which has no impact on everything. And the Gazans are stuck with nobody caring about them. We also need to be honest, and I've said this in gazillion interviews. I mean, everything that happened post-October 7th in Gaza is awful. Of course it is. But somebody also needs to hold Hamas accountable for what Hamas did to the Gazans. I mean, that also needs to be said. Sure, I mean, Israel went in and the IDF, yes. But Hamas did horrible things to the Gazans. And I also have said in every interview, I remind all of us, Hamas was democratically elected by the Gazans in was it 2004 or 5? I remind everybody. And I haven't seen in the past 20 years very few people in Gaza saying, we got to get rid of these bastards because they're causing us extraordinary harm. Yes, there's now the militias that we've paid for. It's not really working out. But I didn't see public protests. I mean, I think we need to be very honest about the role of Hamas in causing extraordinary harm to Gaza.
So, as you know, as everybody here knows, there's been a rise in Holocaust deniers, there's been a rise in October 7th deniers. Especially, from the right, but also on the left in the U.S. And do you think the context within what is happening now, especially within the war after, as we can say the war is over, within that context?
3 things. One, if you didn't know this, you not know it. Israel is terrible at public relations. I mean, we win I know there are Winter Olympics now, right? We get the gold medal for being really bad at right. There are absolutely not only deniers of October 7th, but there are absolutely deniers of the raping of the hostages. There are October 7th minimizers in Israel. If you did not know this. There is this interesting concept in life called facts. And it's a real issue, and if you didn't know this, Yotam obviously knows this. The vitriol directed at hostages by some of the Israeli public would make your skin crawl. There have been physical attacks on hostages and hostage families. the social media against hostages, I've said this in interviews. What you see in the social media in America, Trump and all that, is child's play. You guys are in kindergarten. You guys are in kindergarten here. Like Enav, right? Okay. So if you don't know, she became maybe the most visible hostage mother, Enav Tsangaokil. Her son is Matan. The social media vitriol directed at her by what is called Netanyahu's poison machine, it's unhinged, and it's all in an effort to minimize the hostages in order to make him look better. So it's not only here, it's there too. Yeah. And I need to add, I drive a little Fiat 500 because it's kind of cool. And I have stickers against Netanyahu and against the government, obviously in favor of the hostages. I've been driven off the road twice. Right? My wife has been driven off the highway. So this is nasty. It's real. This is, those of you who've been to Israel, right, you know we're not much into kumbaya. It's not part of our DNA. But we have no alternative, which is why I say to rebuild society means rebuilding society.
How are we on time? Okay, so let's converge upon finishing, and then we'll have some Q&A. But this maybe is a last question, as you know, we want to end these talks with something useful for the audience. So, what would you say, us as people who are not prime ministers or cabinet members, what can we do? What is our part in this? Both Israelis and Jews here, and as just ordinary people. Because
I served in the IDF, everything divides into three, right? You're coming to the IDF, you need to know your Tam. Okay. One is to be engaged. I mean, coming to something like this, I know Sunday, I know, but to be engaged, to be knowledgeable. Two, to be critical. But you can't be critical unless you're knowledgeable. To be critical just without knowing a damn thing is just ignorant as hell. Three, to acknowledge that terrible things have happened. They have. Maybe four, sorry. If mom and dad, I can't emphasize this strongly enough. David, you actually engaged with my mom by email once, right? Right? Okay. My mother would be this would upset her. I want to make that very clear. To talk about their experiences, to do this would make them uncomfortable. So with all due respect to mom, right, and dad, there is no choice. The further we get away from the Holocaust, which did happen, by the way, the more important it is to talk about it, but not only. And this, I'm looking at you, Amy. I don't, because I'm not you. I don't know how to do this. Not only to talk about it historically, but to make it relevant to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in a way that's relevant to them, and that is essential. I read, what's the book you had me read? The Boy in the Striped Pants. I don't know, some of you have read The Boy in the Striped Pants. Okay, so you can think about what you want to think about it, how much he calls it a fable. Fine. But they're reading it, right? So I know, we all read The Diary of Anne Frank, I know. But those kinds of books, somehow to make them accessible, is that the right word? Accessible to contemporary society is essential, and it's beyond challenging, but there's nothing is more disconcerting than this whole notion of denial. I was in a flight to Iz, and sat next to me a woman a little bit younger than me from Los Angeles. She lives in LA, who tells me that the LA fires did not happen. I'm like, dude, you live in LA. She said there were no fires. Wait, I'm not done. Then she says, but if there were fires, they were started by Gavin Newsom.
Wasn't it the Jewish space lasers?
No, it was not the Jewish space lasers. That's a different fire. And you say to yourself, dude, you live, and I was rude, probably, yes. I just cut off the conversation because there's nothing rational. But hang on. We can laugh until tomorrow, but I'm willing to bet you that if we did a poll like this about Holocaust denial, Holocaust minimizing, it's there. So the more we can be engaged, the better. And again, I'm looking at you for the 88th time. I cannot emphasize enough. And I'm allowed to say this? Yes. Last year, the Deseret News did a big story about this. It was on TV. Yes, okay. Because it was a way to acknowledge not only you, but to acknowledge that the kids were listening. And it was a great opportunity to engage with them, and that was incredibly important. That's all I got.
Thank you, Amos. We'll now get some questions. And learning from the past, no advertisements of walks. Odi.
Amos. My parents are not here. Amos is fine.
Where's really? It's fine.
תודה רבה לך.
Last time you were here in this room, the takeaway from me, I went back home and to my wife and said I was so encouraged by his optimism that he said, trust me, Netanyahu will be found guilty. And I thought to myself, wow, that's the first time I felt encouraged in a long time. And I'm going to hope if I see Amos again, I'm going to say, what do you say now about your legal system?
So in the book, when I categorized enablers, I should say, I had access to the very, very, very highest levels of Israeli leadership. You will not ask me names because it's all anonymous, okay? And as Yotam knows, I've spoken at rallies. I've spoken in Haifa and I've spoken in Jerusalem. I need to add, it's the single greatest honor as an Israeli you can be given is to be invited by the Hostage Family Forum to speak at rallies. They invited me to speak about enablers. And the only way I know how to do this is I call people out by name. Okay? So I'll get to your, so one of the people who, and I don't know how many of you have been to rallies in Israel. I don't know what's called in the African American community, the call, the back and forth between the preacher and the, right. So I would name a name, and the people would ask me about somebody else, right? So the name that was often asked me was the president of it, the president of the state, Herzog, who's a total collaborator enabler, okay? And I write about him in the book. In the book, I write that I also asked myself whether or not Bagatz, the High Court of Justice, because remember we have a Supreme Court sitting as the High Court, was an enabler one time when there was the most critical decision. It's an 11-0 decision that Netanyahu can stay in office in spite of the charge sheets, okay? The pace of his trial is slower than I run, and trust me, I run slowly. The judges, it's a three bench judge court, right? Panel, thank you. Are they enablers or are they I think they don't quite know what to do, my take. Because he's as guilty as sin. We all know this. He knows this, which is why he drags out, right? And I think that they're in a complicated situation, unfortunately. I think they've overcomplicated. That they don't want to hold the prime minister guilty, even though he's guilty as hell. The crime he's really guilty of is the one that the attorney general did not charge him with, which is treason. And the treason is, if you haven't followed this carefully, is on two different levels. One is the submarine deal, where the Egyptians got the nuclear submarine, and this new case, which should be exploding more, which is called Qatar Gate, like the country of Qatar, Watergate, like Qatar Gate, because three of Netanyahu's closest advisors received significant money from Qatar. So they've penetrated the prime minister's bureau. Where's that investigation going? It's complicated because remember the head of the police, Ben Gvir, who's our fascist, doesn't want any investigation against Netanyahu. So it's complicated. Do I think that the three-member panel are enablers? No. Are they incompetent? That's the polite version. We're already literally in March. We have the Chagim, we have Pesach and all that. Means by Jewish calendar, we're literally already in May, right? With the election in October, will he be convicted before October? No. Will he lose? Will he no longer be prime minister in October? I'm willing to bet you, again, never bet your last dollar. My second to last dollar, I'm absolutely convinced he's done.
Okay. Any
You had your hand up, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I've heard responses from German families that had brothers or fathers in the military under Hitler. And their response to being bystanders and knowing what was going on was they would have shot us immediately and our families would have been destroyed. What is a good response to that?
It's a great point. When I wrote the book, I met with the descendants of Dutch families who took Jews in. Like their parents took in, the grandparents took in Jews, right? In one instance, the mom took in a Jewish woman for one night and said to her the next morning, "You need to go, because I'm afraid about what will happen to me." And the person who told me this is her daughter, and says Mom was a hero because she took in for one night, and says Mom was right because Mom, I get it, hang on. Another person I met, his mother took in a family with children for one night, but because her husband was imprisoned, she said, "There's no way I can keep this family with me." In those instances, I get the fear. I mean, I get it. That, however, in no way it can be extrapolated, if you will, to bystanders in our society today. Hang on just a second. Wait, hang on. The legislation with Representative King says that you will be prosecuted as a bystander with the exception if it endangers you.
And that has passed
Depends where.
in our legislature.
Absolutely. 100%. Thanks to Representative King and Senator Bramble. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
How can we improve the Israel relations, public relations on social media?
Israel and social media.
Question.
It's an excellent question. I mean, it's actually embarrassing how bad Israel is at this. That's the polite version. I said earlier, ma'am, that we're just disdainful. The government of, the diaspora doesn't interest them. Doesn't interest them in the least, because it plays into Netanyahu. It enables him to say everybody's anti-Semitic. Because if we suck at the public relations and they hit us over the head, it means that it's because of anti-Semitism. It serves his purpose.
The gorilla in the room to me.
I'm sorry?
It's a gorilla in the room to me. It's not Gaza, and it's certainly not Nazi Germany, but what the hell are we doing here? Enablers, not you personally,
Oh.
in this country. Enablers, bystanders.
So it's interesting. I'm going to be I'll answer you directly, but a little bit of, hang on, a little bit of caution. I put together a book proposal examining enablers historically, from Hitler to Trump to Bibi. And I won't tell you which publishing house. And I made my way to the final round of peer review, and it was a tie. And with this very, very, very distinguished publishing house, I won't tell you the name, of course. If it's a tie between the peer reviewers, they don't go forward with the book, because it's their call, right? Because you may have heard about Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's a town. Yes, okay. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. The now potentially former head of ICE.
Yeah.
Bovino? Okay, so I watched him first of all, before listening to him, I looked at him. I saw him in that coat. I thought, my God, here's Heydrich, 90 years later. He's got that, okay. And then I heard him talk. So he's dumber than a rock. But he's in that bizarre world, he's effective in that bizarre world. Useful idiot, 100%. That's 100% correct, useful idiot. And he really, I mean, he struts like I couldn't agree with you more. And again, this will offend some. Israeli friends and family ask me all the time, where are American demonstrators? I know there were X number of thousands in Salt Lake City, and there were 200,000 in New York. Great. More than go to a football game. Great. We had, for 5 years, every Saturday night, 400,000 Israelis, which is 20 million Americans, every Saturday night. Cold, hot, rain, sweating. Yes, nachonolo. 20 million, relatively by numbers. 20 million of us for 5 years. I don't see that here. My Israeli friends and family are asking me all the time, where's the American public? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say you brought up Minneapolis.
Yes, ma'am.
My sister lives there. In the midst of it, she said, no matter what you see on TV, it's far worse living there.
That's what.
But she's always done the protest. But now she's older, and she is helping families by grocery shopping when they're hiding in the houses. And the trainings, they've said, you can either protest or help families because they're taking pictures of everyone. And if you protest and you help, they will follow you to the home.
I have to say something. Not to make it up. Makes zero impression on me. My wife Hagit was what's it called? Yoga Schmoga was doing yoga, and came up to her, a guy dressed, Yoga Schmoga, and said to her the following: "I know who you are. I've seen you." And she's saying, "Well, dude, like, I'm married. I'm fine. Thanks so much." And here's how he had seen her. He was a policeman, because we have our pictures taken all the time. And he said, well, I've seen you at demonstrations. And she regrets that she didn't take out her iPhone and do this to him because, I mean, you don't think fast enough, right? So if I piss you all off, the fact that they follow you, the fact that they know who I am, the fact that trust me, when I tell you I've had physical...
It's that they can't help the families. They'll follow
Hang on. It's more nuanced than that. So I saw the governor of Minnesota use the Anne Frank example. I know there are families in Minneapolis who are taking in Haitian families. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But either you're engaged or you're not engaged. There's no, in Yiddish, right? Either you are or you're not. It's one or the other. Listen, it sucks to demonstrate. I've been picked up, Tom knows this. I was at one of the demonstrations in Jerusalem of the judicial reform thing. We were lawfully where we were. And all of a sudden, the police officer decided that ain't enough. So I went up to him politely. I said to him in Hebrew, my name is, and I'm a lawyer. And I'm curious, how is it that you're closing this road where we are allowed to be here? And he said to me the two scariest words in Hebrew: I am the authority. And I said to him, excuse me, Mr. Officer, can I see the document that says you are the authority? I'm a lawyer. I want to see the piece of paper that says you are the authority. He picked me up and threw me like I was like, the quarterback that today are hoping to throw, right? Okay. My son, who is now a lawyer, went up to him. My kids, went up to the officer and said, you can't do that to my dad. He's, 66 years old. I said, I'm 65. But, and then he picked up my kid and chucked him. There was a cop right here where you're sitting, Carrie. And I went up to him, to the, officer. And I said, you saw that. And he said to me, I didn't see anything. But hang on. That's what it takes. But either you're out there. Does it suck? Yeah, it sucks. I've been called every name of the book. My wife has been called every name of the book. My mom, who's dead, even though she's dead, she's been called every name of the book. But either you're there or you are not. We have time for one more question.
Yes.
Right? Nachon? Galit, one more. No.
Yeah, do we have two options? So
No, I want you to say something.
No,
So we'll do
no,
two.
because she just wants
Keep, that's okay, right?
But we're in the middle of our Holocaust unit right now.
This is הכי
And
חשוב.
last week I had a student stay after class and he was just fidgety. I said, sweetheart, do you have a question or a problem? And he said, yes. And I said, okay, speak it. I said, loud and proud when you talk to me. And he said, Ms. Bergen, I was talking to my dad. He said what we're talking about never happened. And we are in a highly impacted area. Our school has been raided by ICE a couple times. It is code red at my school constantly. And I looked down and I said, sweetheart, what does your heart tell you? And he said, my heart tells me it's important I listen in class. And I said,
Wow.
okay, then what are you going to do with that? And he said, if I ever see anybody hurt, I need to talk to a big person. Because that's what I call grown-ups, because I don't call moms and dads, because a lot of them don't have their moms and dads. So he said, if I ever see anybody get hurt, I talk to a big person. I have the incredible honor of being with over 200 teenagers every single day, but I think all of us
זה הכי
get to talk
חשוב.
to teenagers, whether we're related or they're strangers every day. So can you give parting advice for how we can speak to teenagers in a way that will encourage them to talk to somebody if they see someone being hurt?
So I've spoken, who knows how many times at Amy's school. I think you all know, yes. I mean, I do public speaking worldwide. I'm allowed to say that. Okay, I do. When I met, right, with Amy's students, of all the whatever accolades, all the BS, all that, there's nothing more impactful than talking to children aged 12 to 14. And I think I'm allowed to say this. Some of Amy's students didn't sleep at home last night. Some of Amy's kids slept in cars last night. Some of Amy's kids, the only hot meal they get is when they come to school. This is not the elite of the elite, right? But hang on. When I stood up in front of them, yes, I think what made it relevant to them is when I talked about my mom in the attic. Because I think, I don't know how many of them are sleeping in the attic, but they get the sleeping in the attic. And they get the fear. And there's one thing I've learned, thanks to Amy. I mean, this is me, right? I don't pull any punches. I'm straight and to the point, I mean, hopefully respectfully. And I think that they need to be treated as adults and not to be, oh, Johnny, patted on the head, right? And they need to be told flat out about life. And I think also it's really important for them to be listened to respectfully and not to be dismissed. This hand motion, and that for me, when I, coming to Kennedy tomorrow and to you later next month, if there's one thing that I wish take away from all this, I mean, her kids see, if I may, pardon my English, her kids see shit that the rest of you can't imagine. And the fact that they're willing to listen about the Holocaust is of extraordinary importance. And I have no doubt that some of them go home and their parents say this never happened. I have no doubt. On the other hand, when I met with your class after class after class, they were the most, I mean, with all due respect to law students, yes, they were beyond engaged. I mean, it was great. And the great thing about, can I tell them about the cards?
Yes.
I have in my office 750 thank you notes. Hang on. The best note was, I'm only writing this because Amy told me to. On that note, thank you very much.
Wait, we have one last quick question.
What? Oh.
Yeah, what would your response be to those who minimize the Holocaust by trying to draw comparisons between what the Nazis did to the Jewish people and Israeli military operations in Gaza?
It's a great question. And it comes up in interviews. I think that to understand what happened in Gaza, you have to start with October 7th. Were mistakes made in Gaza? You bet. Has shit happened? You bet. But there's no genocide, there's no ethnic cleansing, there's nothing like that. Has the IDF been engaged in Gaza? Have mistakes been made? I want to emphasize, yes. When you try to kill the bad guys from Hamas, do you kill innocent individuals? Yes. Did Hamas human shield innocent Gazans? The answer is yes. it's much more nuanced than the Holocaust, which is 0 degree nuance.